Hey all, it's Miss Flores. So today we're going to be talking about dividing, but we're going to be dividing by 2-digit numbers. So in 4th grade, y'all were dividing by 1-digit numbers. This is going to be the exact same thing, except for now it's going to be with 2-digit numbers. So our first problem is 560 divided by 18. So I can do this a couple different ways. So I'm still, thinking about it just like I would with normal division, right? I have to think about how many times 18 can go into these numbers. Well, 18 can't go into 5, so I'm going to put an X above that 5. So I'm going to put an X above that 5. But 18 can go into 56. So 56 is what I'm thinking about, how many times 18 can go into 56. So you can do it one of two ways. You can use estimation to kind of give you a better idea on skip counting. Well, 18 is close to 20, so I could think about how many times 20 would go into 56, right? Or I can do repeated addition. So what I can do is I can do 18 plus 18 repeated over on the side. So whichever one you think is going to be better for you, you could try it. So that'd be 14. And I get, 54 is really close to 56, right? And that took 1, 2, 3 18s. So I can say that 18 goes into 56 3 times. That 3 goes above the 6 in 56. 3 times 18 we said was 54, right? So I'll do 54. And now I'm going to do 56 minus 54 was 2. So 18 can't go into 2, right? So I'm going to have to bring my 0 down. So 18 couldn't go into 2, but now it can go into 20, right? Well, I know 18 goes into 20 only one time. 1 times 18 is 18. And I subtract and I get 2. So my answer would be 31, remainder 2. So let's double check our steps. So you can remember, does McDonald's serve cheeseburgers, to remember the steps? So our steps were, in order, our steps were you divide, then we multiply, then we subtract those differences, I compare to see if I can go in another time or not, and then I bring down my next number. So let's look at those steps in order. All right, so my first step was dividing. So I'm going to divide 842 divided by 64. Well, 64 couldn't go into 8, but it can go into 84, right? So I'm going to divide 84 divided by 64. That's going to be my first step. So what I can do is I can use repeated addition to see how many times 64 can go into 84. Well, if I do 64 plus 64, I get 128. So that's way too big, right? So it can only go in one time. 1 times 64 is 64. And I subtract and I get 20. So that was my multiplication, right? So I did 64 times 1 to get my number that I was subtracting. And then I subtracted 84 minus 64 and got 20. So now when I'm comparing 64 to 20. Well, 64 can't go into 20, right? So I'm comparing to make sure that I can't go in another time, because if when I subtracted, I ended up with a number that was larger than what I was dividing by. So in this case, 64. If I ended up with a number larger than 64, then I didn't go in enough times. So that's the importance of comparing. So then I wasn't large enough, so I've got to bring down my next number. So I'm bringing down my last 2. So 64 couldn't go into 20, but it can go into 200, but it can go into 202, right? So now I'm going to continue my repeated addition until I get a number close to 202. So I'm going to do 128 that we already did, plus another 64. 12. And end up with 192, plus another 64. Gets me 256, so that's too big. So 192 is what we're going to look at, right? Well, that took 1, 2, 3 64s. So it's going to be 64 times 3 gets me 192. When I subtract, I end up with 0, Can't do 0 minus 9, so I got to borrow. Turn that into 10, and I end up with 10. So my answer would be 13, remainder 10 as my final answer. All right, now I'm going to do 2,340 divided by 53. All right, so let's try this a different way without using a repeated addition. I'm going to use estimation to skip count to get an idea of how many times it's going to go in. Well, 53 can't go into 2, so I'm going to put an X above it so I don't accidentally put anything there. 53 can't go into 23, but it can go into 234. So 53 is pretty close to 50. So I'm going to skip count by 50 to get an idea of how many times it could go in. Well, 50, if I'm skip counting, that'd be 50, 100, 150, 200. 250 is too big, so I'm going to do 200. Well, that was 50, 100, 150, 200. So that was 4 times, right? So let's try to do 53 times 4, because that's what 50 times 4 was 200. So that was pretty close. So let's see what 53 times 4 is to see if that gives me a closer answer. So 4 times 3 is 12. Carry the 1. 4 times 5 is 20 plus 1 is 21. So that's pretty close, right? So I'm going to say that 53 went to 234 4 times. 4 times 53 was 212. And I subtract and I get 22. So I'm going to compare. 53 can't go into 22. So I know that I went in enough times. So I'm going to bring down my 0. And I'm with 220. Well, if I look at this problem that I just did, right, 212 was really close, right, without going over. So I'm going to say that 53 can go into 220 4 times as well. 4 times 53 was 212. And I subtract. And when I do that, I get 8. Well, 53 can't go into 8. I don't have anything left, so I end up with 44, remainder 8. So both ways are going to give you a good answer. So either you can do repeated addition in order to see how many times it can go in along the way, or you can use estimation. But no matter what you do, you will have to do some work on the side in order to be able to get your answer when you are dividing by 2-digit numbers. Let's look at the next one. I've got 723 divided by 31. Let's try using estimation this time. So 31 is very close to 30. So I'm going to skip count by 30, which is going to be kind of similar to skip counting by 3. So 31 couldn't go into 7, but it can go into 72. Well, I'm skip counting by 30. It's going to be 30, 60, 90. 90 is too big. So I'm going to try 60. Well, 30 times 2 is 60. So let's try to do 31 times 2 to see what that would be to try to go into 72. So 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. So I end up with 62. So 31 goes into 72 2 times. 2 times 31 is 62. I subtract and I get 10. So now I'm going to compare. 31 can't go into 10, so I know I went in enough times. So I'm going to bring down my 3. So 31 can go into 103. So let's use my skip counting to see how many times. So remember, we're going to skip count by 30 because it's pretty close. So 30, 60, 90, 120. 120 is too big, so let's try 90. 30 times 3 was 90. So I'm going to do 31 times 3 to see what that would be to go into 103. 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 3 is 9. So it would 93. So 31 went into 31 went into 103 3 times. 3 times 31 was 93. And I subtract and I get 10. So my answer ends up being 23, remainder 10. 23, remainder 10. All right, let's try this one. We'll do this, the repeated addition on this one. So I've got 1,359 divided by 45. So 45 can't go into 1. And it can't go into 13, but it can go into 135, right? So let's do addition. So I'm going to do 45 plus 45 is 90. So let's add another 45. end up with 135 exactly, right? So that means 45 went in 1, 2, 3 whole times to 135. So 45 went into 135 3 times. 3 times 45 is 135. So I'm going to subtract that and I get 0. So I'm going to compare. Obviously it went in enough times. So I'm going to bring down my 9. Well, 45 can't go into 9, right? It's too big. So 45 is going to go into 9 0 times. 0 times 45 is 0. And I end up with 9. So my answer is going to be 30, remainder 9. So now, you notice this step right here, when we realized it couldn't go into it. I don't just skip it. I say that 45 goes into that number 0 times because we are dealing with whole numbers. A 0 as a whole number is going to completely change the place value of my number. So those zeros are very, very, very important. Let's look at the next one. So I've got 7,295 divided by 72. Let's do the repeated addition on this one as well. So 72 couldn't go into 7, but it can go into 72, right? 72 goes into 72 exactly once. 1 times 72 is 72. I subtract and I get 0. Well, 72 can't go into 0, right? So I bring down my 9. So now here's another trick. If I know that 72 goes into 9 0 times, right, because it's way too big, I can just put a 0 up here and then bring down my 5 and see that 72 can go into 95, right? 72, if I were to do my repeated addition, 72 plus 72 is 144. So that's much too large for 95. So I'm going to say that 72 goes into 95 one time. 1 times 72 is 72. I subtract, and I end up with 23. So my answer is 101, remainder 23. So remember, make sure that if a number is going in 0 times because it's not large enough, make sure you're putting that 0, because if I didn't, I would have accidentally put 11. 11 is very different than 101. So make sure you're putting your zeros. Let's look at the last one before we look at our daily assignment. Okay, so we've got a smoothie shop receives a delivery of 980 ounces of grape juice. How many Royal Purple smoothies can be made with the grape juice? So if I look at my Royal Purple smoothie right here, right, we're going to know how much grape juice, how many smoothies can be made out of that grape juice. Well, it says right here, 22 ounces of grape juice are used in one of those smoothies. So I want to know how many. So I'm going to take my total amount of grape juice, which is 980, and I'm going to divide that by the amount of grape juice that's in one smoothie, which is 22. So let's use estimation on this. So 22 can't go into 9, but it can go into 98, right? 22 is really close to 20. So I'm going to skip count by 20 to see how many times it can go into 98. Well, if I can skip count by 20, I end up with 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. 100 is a little bit too big. So let's try going down to 80. Well, 20 times 4 was 80. So let's try to do 22 times 4. Well, 4 goes into 2 8 times. I'm sorry. I've got my multiplication and division confused. 4 times 2 is 8. And then 4 times 2 again is 8. So 22 went into 98 4 times. Let me use red. 22 went into 98 4 times. 4 times 22 was 88. And I'm going to subtract and I get 10. Well, 22 can't go into 10, so I'm going to bring down my 0. So let's skip count by 20s to see how close it can get to 100. So if I skip count by 20, I end up with 20, 40, 60, 80, 100. Well, 20 times 5 is 100, so let's try to see what 22 times 5 is. So that's 10. And I end up with 110. That's a little bit too big. So instead of it going in 5 times, I'm going to say it goes in 4 times. So 22 went into 100 4 times. 4 times 22 is 88. I subtract, and I end up with 12. So my answer would be 44, remainder 12. But if we want to know how many smoothies can be made, I'm not going to make part of a smoothie, right? I'm only going to make whole smoothies. So 44 whole smoothies can be made. All right, let's go ahead and start going over some of the questions on your assignment. So you have 2 assignments that you're gonna do today. You have some questions on this practice, which you'll do on a scratch sheet of paper and type your answer in. You also have a Google form over some division problems, but let's look at this. All right, so these first 2 I'm gonna do with y'all, and I'm gonna show the 2 different ways that we were doing it, right? Where you can skip count or you can do repeated addition. So let's start with repeated addition. All right, so I have 775 divided by 35. So I know 35 can't go into 7, but it can go into 77, right? So let's try adding 35 plus 35 to see if we get close to 77. So end up with 10. End up with 70, so that's going to be pretty close, right? So 35 went to 77 2 times because I had 2 35s. So 2 times 35 was 70, and I subtract it, and I get 7. So 35 cannot go into 7, right? It's too small, so I bring down my 5. So I know 35 can go into 75. We said that 35 went 35 twice was 70, right? So that's still close enough. So I'm going to say 35 goes into 75 2 times again. 2 times 35 was 70, and I subtract and I get 5. So my answer would be 22, remainder 5. 22, remainder 5. All right, now let's try skip counting on this one. I've got 820 divided by 41. 41 is very close to 40. Skip counting by 40 is going to be like skip counting by 4, but adding a 0 at the end. So 41 couldn't go into 8, but it can go into 82, right? Well, 41 is close to 40, so if I went 40, 80, 120, it's going to be closest to 80, right? So 40 times 2 is 80. So let's try 41 times 2. So I end up with 82 exactly. So 41 goes into 82 exactly 2 times. 2 times 41 is 82. And I subtract and I get 0. So 41 can't go into 0, so I bring down this 0. Well, 41 still can't go into 0, right? It goes in 0 times. Remember, these whole number zeros are important. 0 times 41 is 0. I subtract and I get 0, so my answer is just 20. Make sure you are doing these problems on a scratch sheet of paper. Because the thing is that if you're using a phone or a calculator or something to do these problems, the questions where you have a remainder, like this first one, right? This first one we had a remainder. If you're using a calculator, it's going to give you a decimal. We have not learned how to divide with decimals yet. So if you get answers and you get decimals and you're typing those decimals into your answers, I will assume you used a calculator to solve these problems, and you will not get any credit whatsoever on your assignment. You will get a 0, period. Do not use a calculator. Work these problems out with scratch paper. So what you'll do on your own is you'll do the following 4 questions. So you've got 2 here and you've got 2 here. You'll type your answers at the top. Make sure that you're including remainders if you have them, and then you'll complete the Google form. All right, y'all, this is your Google form that you will have today for division. Make sure to put your first and last name. You also have 10 questions. All of these questions will be fill in the blank. There will be no multiple choice. Make sure on questions where it says to type a small r, so lowercase r, for your remainder, because you will have some problems with remainders. You also have some word problems as well. Remember, we are dividing, so chances are you will be dividing on these word problems. Only 10 problems. Make sure to submit once you are done. And then once you've completed this and those 4 problems on the Google slide, then you are done with your work today. Make sure you're studying your vocabulary and completing your WOW. And I will see y'all later. Have a good day, guys. Bye.